Ladies and gentlemen, I want to read you this, and this is why you should subscribe to this channel. Get this segment viral because nobody's really talking about this. Twitter and Facebook have seen $51 billion of combined market value wiped out since booting Trump from their platforms. This is Market Insider, BusinessInsider.com. This is just this evening, like during the second impeachment. Facebook and Twitter have collectively seen $51.2 billion erased from their market caps over the last two trading sessions as investors balk at their banning of President Trump. Facebook saw $47.6 billion erased from its public valuation, while Twitter's market cap dropped by $3.5 billion. Both companies announced last week they would permanently ban the president, saying keeping him on their platforms posed, the bans come as Trump faces second impeachment. Okay, what they've done, ladies and gentlemen, is the following. Everything is President Trump's fault. The pandemic is his fault. He worked with Russia. Even inquiring about President Biden's son, well, that's out of bounds. That's off limits. So you couldn't talk about that prior to... you couldn't talk about that a couple months back. Now you can kind of discuss it because, well, the federal government is looking into it, and there are numerous investigations into Caligula Biden's son. But they're now legislating not only words and speech, but thought and sentiment. If they can, it's actually not about ideas. If they can gauge, or if they can either suppress or amplify emotions in the manner they choose, that's all they want. So what social media does is it's not just a platform where some voices are elevated while others are completely swept under the rug. These are platforms where emotions are either amplified or completely suppressed. Now, the rebuttal from Democrats will be, well, Trump, and his words compelled people to do negative things, and in Washington, D.C., that was a direct result of Trump's words. Then why didn't they go and take him to court? Because they would, of course, be laughed out of court. It's no laughing matter. What took place was horrendous, and I condemn that. But political speech, unfortunately, in this country is protected. It's not protected in cyberspace. So if your business model, like, I don't have to tell Zuckerberg or Dorsey anything. They're billionaires. But long term, they don't care. They don't care if long term their companies don't exist. Like Facebook will be around for a while because Facebook owns a whole bunch of other companies. Twitter is a much smaller company with a great deal of debt, $3.4 billion in debt, that really doesn't offer anything. At least with Facebook, you can kind of, show people what you ate. You have a profile, where I don't have Twitter or Facebook. So there's still a person breaking the law, impersonating me on Twitter, deceiving other people, actively breaking the law. There are laws pertaining to bullying and impersonation in cyberspace, and that person is breaking the law. Twitter knows who this person is. Amazon knows who this person is. I do not have a Twitter account. I haven't had a Twitter account for 2 years. But that account, I believe, has been suspended numerous times, but it's still there. That's the way Twitter works. And you have a whole bunch of illegal activity being planned and orchestrated on both platforms. In fact, the Washington Post wrote an article about Facebook today and how they're complicit or culpable for what took place in Washington. But it's not just that. I mean, we've had 5 to 6 months of nonstop chaos and mayhem on the streets of this country. We've had over $1 billion+ in property damage and insurance claims. We've had 19 lives lost. We've had buildings set ablaze. And a lot of the coordination was done on these platforms. There are three brilliant journalists, Andy Ngo, Ian Miles Chong, and Tim Pool, and they've talked about that endlessly. But ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel. We're on our way to 200,000 subscribers, and your support is greatly appreciated. If you want to support my voice long term, my Patreon is below. $51.2 billion. So Trump basically took that away from them. They have there's a short-term political victory that they've achieved. They've been successful in blaming Trump for everything, even though he used the word peaceful within the speech that allegedly compelled people to commit really horrible things. Those 5 individuals should be alive today. That's true. But there have been 19 individuals who lost their lives, I think over 19, linked to the 5 to 6 months of very peaceful protests. See, that's another, there's a breakdown, there's no logic anymore. It's all emotion. If there's property damage and lives lost, and it's linked to left-leaning protest, well, at least it was for a good cause, according to the left. You know, I mean, you had how many days, consecutive days in Portland and Seattle? You had city blocks taken over in Seattle. You had how many weeks consecutively, months of clashes between law enforcement? How many injuries among law enforcement professionals? We had 14,000 arrests linked to left-leaning protests. You had Democrats running funds to pay for bail. And according to the Washington Examiner article, there were like 6 Democrats that pretty much, through their words, I mean, you could read the article. The words were even more egregious than what President Trump stated. Now, President Trump made missteps. President Biden will make missteps too. The difference is that you won't be able, I mean, this is Orwellian. This is the future that Democrats want. It's still not long. It's not. They're not going to win in the manner they think. So you're already seeing repercussions within a couple of days. $51.2 billion erased in the stock market. And you're going to see Twitter with its long-term debt and the fact it's not growing and the fact that it's alienated 74 million supporters of President Trump. They're not going to be around in 4 to 5 years. They'll be MySpace. Every tweet, every hour, every minute that's wasted on Twitter and Facebook, but mainly Twitter, will be time you never get back. Life is short. Why spend time in a cyber reality when you can focus on actual reality? I mean, unless you've completely mastered like this world and reality, you know, like dealing with the world we live in, life, why would you want to spend hours President Trump used Twitter to his advantage politically, but also, I mean, it was a hallmark of his presidency. But he should have realized that what made him great was also going to be his undoing, politically. President Trump, because of cyberspace, has turned into a Shakespearean character, a political tragedy. And I say this as somebody who still claims that President Trump is the best president of my lifetime. In terms of achievements and accomplishments, I don't know a president that's had the peace deals that have taken place during his presidency, that he's helped broker, the Abraham Accords, the first president to step foot in North Korea. We've had record low unemployment all throughout President Trump's presidency. But see, he didn't realize that he allocated more funding to historically black colleges and universities than any president ever, signed prison reform legislation, renegotiated NAFTA into the USMCA. Like, for example, the USMCA, you have more of a car now that's manufactured, that needs to be manufactured by American workers. So that's a good thing, very good thing. Or by workers that have a certain certain protections within their employment, a certain wage per hour. And there's a whole bunch of things that, like, there are a whole bunch of accomplishments that President Trump has presided over. But you see, he was the first modern president in that he really utilized the technology that he had to his advantage and to his detriment. And because of that, they were able to, Democrats, because they had an advantage in numbers. Hollywood, corrupt intelligence officials, half the country, the liberal voters, the Democratic voters who didn't vote for him, they created this fantasy that was never fact-checked online. So if it was a Steele dossier, they were able to amplify that message, the distrust, the division, and they were able to paint him, to categorize him, to dehumanize him as just simply a Manchurian candidate. And then what President Trump did, instead of, he has a sledgehammer approach. In 2015 and 2016, and for years prior to that, he alternated between this like sledgehammer approach, this bulldozer, sledgehammer, in your face approach, and also he was able to have interviews on CNN and major networks, MSNBC he was on. He was able to introduce himself and his ideas to the entire country. The longer when he became president, what took place was he segregated himself. And there was already a ban on what President Trump was able to. There was not a ban in terms of what's taking place now. I mean, they're squeezing the vice right now. They want to just suppress any thought and especially any emotion, any distrust towards them, any suspicion towards them can't exist. Any distrust and suspicion towards Trump is amplified. Any allegations against them must never be uttered. Any allegations towards Trump, the pandemic is his fault. This is the logic. What happened in Washington, D.C., that's directly his fault, even though they could never make that case in court because political speech is protected. But it's interesting, ladies and gentlemen, what took place throughout his presidency was that he was able to use Twitter, and maybe Facebook not so much, but he was able to use Twitter as a political platform to circumvent the New York Times, MSNBC, CNN, and the Washington Post. But see, what happened was a very bizarre phenomenon. He was able to amplify his message and circumvent the arbiters of good taste or truth, or circumvent the traditional media avenues or traditional media sources and platforms. Like, he didn't have to be interviewed by the New York Times or the Washington Post. He could just tweet what he wanted, and they would distort. They would amplify whatever message he wanted amplified, or whatever message he wanted to resonate, but they would also distort his message. He didn't care so much if they altered his message a bit, as long as he got his point across. But see, if you do that 2 to 3 or 4 times a day, every day for 4 years, this hysteria begins. And Democrats are fascinated and they're obsessed, but they also say, okay, well, if this person is going to utilize this platform, we're going to make sure that everything he doesn't say is amplified also. We're going to make sure that even though he's trying to create his own narrative, we will distort as much as we can and add our own spin to things. And he made it easy for them. He could have simply said, I disagree with the anthem protest. He didn't have to use an insult. That was wrong what he did. And I learned in the past 4 years that any accomplishments, like we had record low unemployment, record low Black and Latino unemployment. He was the first president to step foot in North Korea. He signed prison reform legislation. We had peace deals between Israel, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Serbia and Kosovo. His words drove them nuts. President Obama presided over a failed NATO intervention where you've had, 10 years now of chaos and mayhem in that country because of President Obama's failed NATO intervention, which was an impeachable offense. When you look at the destruction that took place, Biden was a part of that. So was Clinton. The way the American psyche is, the American voters, well, you know what? That's going to happen with any president. But not every president's going to be as rude and as uncouth and as boorish as Trump. He was rude. He was mean. He was a bully. They bullied him. He fought back. But he's this sledgehammer that always fights back. But because he took certain liberties in terms of, getting his point across or fighting back or, certain insulting things that he said, even though his accomplishments should obviously outweigh any insulting or negative words that he wrote on Twitter. The average voter says, well, he's just a bully and he needs to be cut down to size. And it created this hysteria and this frenzy. And so, whereas the way he was initially, he was able to, his strategy got him the White House. That same strategy made it very difficult for him the past year and a half. Even though the pandemic was not his fault and the worst outcomes take place in Democratic-run states, the more discontent that you can sow. They were unhappy with Trump when there was record low unemployment. So they didn't need much to make everything cataclysmic and apocalyptic. Plus they had his words that they could twist. And when there wasn't an opportunity to twist his words, they invented things that he didn't say. He never called the pandemic a hoax. He never said 1930s and 1940s Germans were fine people. He never said those things, but he made it easy for them to manipulate the sentiment and distort his words because of his in-your-face mentality. Now, again, I look at it from the vantage point that his accomplishments, you judge a person by their actions, not their words. In politics, however, American politics, you're judged more so by your words, unfortunately. And that is a hard lesson to... That's something that's very difficult to accept. And that's something I'm sure that President Trump can't accept right now because he was a businessman his whole life. So he was how he was judged was whether or not he made money. And he probably went into the presidency saying, hey, if I do a great job, if there's record low unemployment, I'll be fine. It won't matter what I say. It won't matter how I utilize cyberspace. They flipped everything. And you see right now they're tightening the vice. So the worst thing, the loss of life, those 5 people should be alive. That's the true tragedy here. But in terms of political repercussions, the people who entered that building have eliminated for the short term any political power that President Trump has. And you're going to have President Biden coming in, and the only mandate President Biden will have will be not being Trump. That's not going to last long. And there will be controversies and scandals. It'll be that much more difficult to address those controversies and scandals with Twitter and Facebook and others suppressing thought and emotion. That's the issue. Propaganda is about emotion, not just about information. Okay, everybody knows that the President Biden and his son are just like the Clintons. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that there's corruption beyond belief. But the suppression is now bottled up, which is what Democrats wanted. I mean, the emotions and the suspicion are bottled up. But if you lose $51 billion in a couple of days from trading, in the long term, it ain't going to work out. So their demise could be linked to banning Trump, which I think it will be as well. The Democratic Party, this is a short-term tactic that they're jumping up and running up the score and dancing in the end zone. They don't realize that the championship game is eventually they're going to have to, in 2022, they're going to lose the House. I mean, there needs to be a push towards Republicans that defended President Trump. If the Ben Sasse and Mitt Romney wing of the Republican Party win out, then they'll lose. They'll lose miserably, especially in 2024. But if you have Jim Jordan, Matt Gaetz, Devin Nunes, those people, Rand Paul, Ron Johnson, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, if they rebound, they have to go on MSNBC, CNN every single day. They have to get off of cyberspace, really. There's no point. They have to go and just get on those networks all the time, get into discussions. You know that you're going to try to go after you and treat you unfairly, but you need to do what President Trump didn't do, which is communicate his message to everyone, especially towards the end of his presidency. They were very successful in suppressing thought even before they banned President Trump. That can't happen again. But 2022, there's instant impeachment of President Biden because that Caligula's laptop. That's a story that's just that's the first inning. Give me your thoughts below. This current strategy of silencing voices is not going to help Democrats at all. And you see right now, losing $51.2 billion didn't help. Give me your thoughts. Thank you. Hit subscribe to this channel.